We say together, and so it is. Well, thank you everyone for being with us today. Today we're going to finish up our thoughts from Back to the Basics, the beginning of the new year. And we're going to finish up with the 5 steps of treatment that we started on last week. Just a couple of announcements I need to make. There was something wrong with the audio from last week. It was cutting in and out. I re-uploaded the backup audio file to YouTube, so it's not quite as loud as it would be through the wireless mic, but it is not cutting in and out. So if you had trouble hearing last week, you can go back to YouTube and you can find a talk with a little bit better audio. Changed all the batteries. I've tested out all the equipment. I cannot find what the problem might have been, but hopefully it is gone. Second thing is I found a couple of documents on my computer from different classes that Lori and I have taught over the years on treatment. And I am going to cut and paste those into an email and send that out to those on the email distribution list. And if you're not on the email distribution list, you can go to our page on Facebook, and there'll be a link there where you can open that email and you can read those 2 documents. Just 1 or 2 pages each. You can print them off and kind of keep them for reference, but just something that you can take away and have as a reminder of the things that we were talking about today. So we started the year by saying, well, what is your concept of God? What do you believe about God? And it's important because if this idea of prayer, which is generally considered somehow a communication with God, if this idea of praying is talking to this thing called God, then we have to have some idea of what it is that we're talking to. We have to have some idea of how it is that it works. And as I mentioned, one common conception, at least one that I grew up with, is that if somehow we ask God for a favor and we are deemed worthy of that favor, then the divine will grant it to us. If we don't consider ourselves worthy enough to go directly to God, we tend to go through some sort of an intermediary, an angel or a saint or a member of the clergy, those sorts of things, and say, would you ask on my behalf? It's kind of like, well, maybe God likes you better than me and we'll do the favor for you. And that's okay. It's a starting point in our journey, our spiritual journey. As a little child, at least that was encouraging us to know that there's a power in the universe that loves us and it does respond to us. But as we grow in wisdom, as we grow in experience, our concepts need to be updated as we go along. So we have kind of come to a point of saying, let's just consider, let's just think or use as a starting place that the way that this business called prayer works is there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. We call that the law of mind. And instead of using the word prayer, we use the word treatment, because as I said last week, prayer is kind of a loaded word. People have different ideas of what it is and how it works. Treatment makes us stop and ask, well, what do I mean by that? And what we mean by that is we are treating the causes of conditions which are in consciousness. We believe we live in a spiritual universe, and by spiritual we mean conscious universe. And the activity of consciousness is thought. It is a mental activity. This is why it's called spiritual mind treatment. It is a mental activity. If we go back to the book of Genesis, which is well known in our part of the world, we can see that creation was an act of will and volition on the part of the Creator. God said, let there be, and there was. Excuse me. Let there be. And of course, spirit, as we consider it, is not excuse me, does not have vocal cords and arms and legs and hands and feet and those kind of things. We think in the terms of spirit as being without those forms. So this speaking, this saying, let it be, was not a physical activity of vocal cords vibrating with the air passing by, but rather a mental activity, a thought. The divine creates through divine thought. Something acts upon that thought. Something we call the law of mind acts upon that thought. And then the physical form comes into manifestation or into creation. God said, let there be stars and planets, and invisible energy became visible matter and took the appropriate shape over time. So we think of the speaking of the word as the involution and the unfoldment as the evolution, And we come to recognize then, or we come to speculate that this thing that we call God was involved in matter from the first place. That is, matter did not somehow form itself. Matter did not somehow create consciousness out of itself, but consciousness was always there. Perhaps hidden, perhaps subdued, but there. And this consciousness has been pushing forward through evolution over the millennia to bring itself to a point where it could become self-aware. And that is what we recognize as us. We are an individualized expression of life who has the ability but doesn't always use that ability to be self-aware. We are aware that we think, and we can be aware of what we are thinking, and we can change what we are thinking. And this is most important, because many times I'll get people come into a class and they say, oh, I have no choice but to think what I'm thinking. Somebody said something to me and I have no choice but to be angry with them. I have no choice but to snap back at them, and these kind of things. And it takes a while to say, you do have that choice. You can stop, right? This is what, when we were discussing mindfulness, this is what Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about. As the anger arises, we can be aware that anger is arising. And at that moment, we can choose to entertain it or not to entertain it. So we have to be aware of the fact that we have the ability, even though we don't always use it, we have the ability to be aware of what we are thinking. And we have the ability to change the direction of those thoughts. This is change your thinking, change your life. So we come to a place in this entire proposition that says there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. And it does so because this is a spiritual or a mental universe, and we are spiritual mental beings. This power is always responding to us according to our belief, whether we are aware of what we believe or not, and whether we are aware that it is working or not. And we use the example of gravity. Gravity is always working. Gravity is always working upon us. Whether we are awake, whether we are asleep, whether we are under anesthesia, gravity is always working. This power is always working. As we come into the realization then that this power is always working, it seems pretty obvious choice to say, well then, I probably ought to be aware of what I believe, and I probably ought to be more careful with what I allow myself to believe, because there is this power that is working upon me. Again, when you become aware of gravity, you don't go look over the edge of the cliff, because you are aware that that is dangerous. Leaning over the edge of the cliff in the presence of the power of gravity can lead to unpleasant consequences, a tumble down the hill, for example, or worse. So we arrive at a place in our spiritual growth where we recognize then that physical evolution, the unfoldment of life from the simplest of matter into the various life forms, that with each step function of evolution have produced a life form capable of greater movement and capable of greater intelligence, that life was moving itself forward to get to a point of a being such as us who could then consciously cooperate, to become conscious co-creators of our experience. This is why Dr. Holmes called us spiritual explorers, in spiritual adventurers, in the unexplored territory of mind. See? Every day is an adventure. Every day is an adventure of deciding what would we have today? How will we express life today? How will we express joy today? How will we express love today? And then this brings us to a technique or a process to use in order to start that change of beliefs going, to get the snowball rolling down the hill, so to speak. So we have to start with this idea that we have an intention. What is it you want to have happen? And then we have a technique that we can use to attune our consciousness, or to align our thoughts with the way that life works, in order for us to experience the outpicturing of that intention. One of the most powerful questions that Lori and I learned as we were going through our ministerial training is to ask the question, what do you want to have happen now? Because many times people would come in to talk to us, and naturally they're upset with the things that are going on in their life. There's something that's going on that's not working the way that they know it should work. There's got to be a better way. And they're kind of stuck in that drama of telling that story, right? And the Buddhists tell us this is being shot with a second arrow. We got shot one time, but we keep telling the story over and over and over again. And every time we tell it, it's like being shot again. We have to break out of that. We have to stop that. We got to get out of that drama. So one of the most powerful questions you can ask of yourself when something does not seem right is, what do I want to have happen now? What do I want to have happen now? Just stop yourself right there. You're talking about what you don't want to have happen. What do you want to have happen? And you have to be able to state that in positive terms, not in negative terms. And what I mean by that is you can't say, well, I don't want this to happen, or I don't want that to happen, right? You have to bring yourself to a point of flipping that over and say, well, when that's not happening, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And we have to come to some recognition then of what it is that we want to have happen in a positive statement. And for example, when people are trying to break a habit, they might say, I want to quit smoking. Well, that's good. It's good that you want to quit smoking. But quit smoking is still talking about smoking. See, and it's a negative statement. I want to not smoke. So one of the ways to think of it is that the subjective mind, the subconscious mind, doesn't understand the word not. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it helps to think of it that way. So when you say, I am not smoking, you are saying, I am smoking, as far as your subjective is concerned. So what is the opposite of that? What is the opposite of not smoking? Well, why do you want to not smoke? Well, I want to breathe freely. Okay. For example, okay, so what you want to have happen is to breathe freely. This is a positive statement. And then we can work with that. Now, when we are thinking about what we want to have happen, we want to align that or attune that to what we know about God, what we believe about God. God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. God is all-presence, for example. But you kind of subdivide it into things like love and peace and joy and power and presence, you see, the main aspects of God. So what is it that you want to have happen, and how does it relate to what God already is? What God already is. So now we are thinking about our concept of God. You see, this is why I started the year with what is your concept of God? What is your realization of God? How would the divine see this situation that we are talking about today? The divine doesn't know any problems. Right? So this is something Emmett Fox tells us. He says, if you're going to be talking to God, you have to speak to God in a language God understands, and God doesn't understand problems. What is it that you want to express more fully? What is it you want to express more completely, you see? What is it that you want to have in your life that gives the divine an opportunity to experience and express joy through you and as you? This is the way that you want to enter into this practice. The four major areas that people will come into the clergy for treatment are health, wealth, love, and creative self-expression. Health, usually there's some form of sickness or disease, lack of ease, and they want that gone. Wealth, they're experiencing some form of restriction or limitation. Okay. Love, they want to share the love that they have, and they want to have the perfect people in their lives to express that love. In creative self-expression, we want to be fulfilled in our activities, in our work, in all of the things that we do. So we come back then and we think about, well, what do we know about God? This is the first step of treatment, is recognition. What do you know about God? Well, if you think about health, the divine is perfect. And the divine creates through its own will and volition, through its own thought. But its own thoughts must always be perfect. Always be perfect. It cannot know imperfection. If the divine mind was divided into perfect and imperfect, it would cancel itself out because it is all powerful. So everything that it thinks is perfect, and therefore everything that it does is perfect. These bodies that we have are divine ideas that have come into existence. And as they have come into existence, they have come in from a spiritual prototype, if you want to think of it that way, a divine idea of perfection. So we know that the divine idea is perfection. We know that everything that the divine does is perfection. And this is where we want to bring our consciousness. For example, if we are looking for a demonstration of health, or we are looking for divine right action and unfoldment of certain conditions in our lives, everything God does is perfect. Everything God does is perfect. If we are thinking of wealth, we want to think of, well, what is the substance of the universe? See? And the divine is the substance of the universe. Invisible energy takes visible form. It is utilized in that form in a time and a place, and then it goes back into invisible energy. The sunshine becomes the food that we eat. The sunshine evaporates the oceans, waters, and moves them as clouds over the land and drops that rain on the soil. And the soil itself is some part of the divine energy that has come into formation as the planet, as an act of creation when the divine said, let there be. So now what we are doing in a step of recognition is that we are taking this stimulus. I love this idea, this desire we have. What is it you want to have happen now? This is the stimulus that is moving you to remove any ideas of separation from your consciousness as they relate to whatever it is that you want to have happen in your life. Okay. So if we are experiencing lack and limitation, there is some sort of separation in our consciousness that is keeping us from attuning with the abundance of the universe. Our desire to eliminate that condition from our life is a desire to remove that separation. See, it seems like we are trying to get more stuff, trying to get more material things, but what we are really trying to do is get the consciousness of God, to see it as God would see it, to realize it as God would realize it, and to experience it as God would experience it. Now, each of these steps of treatment, we talk about the 5, the first being recognition. We're talking about a feeling of completeness, not just some words. I know there's only one life, and that life is God, and that life is perfect. That's good. That's a good place to start. But we use those words to get started, similar to priming a pump. I don't know if any of you remember the old pumps, the well pumps with the handles, and you had to put water in to get them started. And once you put the water in, it could create the vacuum that it needed, that when you move the handle, it would draw up water from the well. We have to prime that pump. So we use words that are familiar to us to get started. But what we are looking for is that feeling, the realization at the subconscious level, for lack of a better way to describe it, the feeling that yes, God already is. God already is perfect health. God already is perfect supply and abundance. God already is love. God is already expressing itself perfectly. So we use whatever words we need to use to get ourselves started, and we stay with that step until we have that feeling of completeness. Now, when we're doing a service and I'm doing a treatment to open or close a service, there's a time limitation, and I have to move through those steps. But when you're doing your treatment work at home, you might take several days or several weeks of working to really get that feeling of completeness at that step. And this is why Dr. Holmes says you treat until the condition changes. You treat until the condition changes. Now, you never want to sit down and say, oh boy, this is a big problem. This is going to be a tough one, and I'm going to have to treat on this for a long time. You don't want to start off with that belief. You want to start off saying that there's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. And I do this treatment now, and it's enough. When I release it and I let it go, it's enough. And then the next day, if your condition hasn't changed, you start all over again. Because each time you do that, you are building consciousness. And Emmett Fox says that you are treating the treatment. Your first treatment is fine. What you're doing is you are treating yourself after that to know that that first treatment is fine. Right? He says we have to work where we are. We can't go beyond our consciousness, but we have to build our consciousness. We have to move it forward. So Emmett Fox gives the example. If you're walking down the street and you see someone who is hurt and they're bleeding, by all means, you do a treatment to know perfect health. But if you open your eyes and they're still bleeding, well, then you get your tourniquet out. You do what is appropriate with the level of consciousness that you have. You see? So we want to go into our treatment realizing that what we are doing is building up a realization of completeness. And step number 1 is we realize that God is all there is. And God already is whatever this thing is, this condition that we want to have happen. The example I opened with was to breathe freely. Everything that the divine does is in perfect freedom. It has created these lungs in perfect freedom. It has created the trees that give us oxygen in perfect freedom. See? We are bringing our mind to this aspect of God as perfect freedom, perfect wisdom, omniscience. It knew how to create the lungs. It knew how to create the trees, you see. We are aligning and attuning our consciousness with the recognition that God already is. God already has whatever this thing is that we want to demonstrate in our lives. And what we really want to demonstrate is that we realize that God consciousness. We realize the divine, that aspect of the divine. Joel Goldsmith gives us the example. He says if you go into the lobby of a building in a big city and you have an appointment on the 28th floor, you press the button for the elevator and you get in. And what happens is the elevator goes up. It's not like you get in the shaft and the building comes down around you. So he tells us this to remind us that we are not trying to bring God down into the problem, but we are trying to bring our consciousness up to the level of the divine where the problem does not exist. The problem does not exist. And this is why we start by taking the problem out of the negative and putting it into the positive. When we have spent whatever time we need in step number one, as I say, we start with the words, whatever words are good and familiar to us. There's only one life, and that life is God, and that life is perfect, and that life is my life too. But then we start to get a feeling that comes up. And whatever words that come to us intuitively from that feeling, we continue with, As I said, it is the intelligence that created the bodies. It is the intelligence that created the earth. It is the intelligence that created the trees. It is the power and the wisdom that knows what to do. See, now I'm kind of flowing from that feeling. It is the wisdom that takes a sperm and an egg and little by little develops a perfect human body. Whatever words start to come from that feeling that is coming up, that feeling that God is all that there is, that God already knows, that God already is all powerful, we let those words come. When we have arrived at a point where, a point of completeness, and by that I mean at this moment in time, today, at this moment in time, there's nothing more that I can say, there's nothing more that I can feel that will take me into any more of a recognition that God is already good, already whole, already perfect. See, then we move on to the second step. And the second step is unification. And by unification, I mean we bring ourselves to a realization that we are part of everything that we just spoke of in step number one. See, the divine life has created me out of itself, in its image and likeness, as its beautiful, perfect expression of life. It has created me that it might enjoy life as me. It has created me that it might express life as me. I am its arms and legs and hands and feet. I am its ambassador. I am its individualized expression here on this planet Earth. What we are doing in this second step, again, we are starting with words that are familiar to us. We are evoking the feeling that, hey, that includes me, you see. Remember, Dr. Holmes tells us that all of our problems stem from an idea of separation. And in the book of Genesis, the separation is Adam and Eve leaving the garden. And as Judy Collins says, we're trying to get our way back into that garden. We're trying to get our way back in to eat from the tree of life. So we are closing that gap of separation that exists only as an idea in our mind. We cannot be separate from that which created us out of itself. We cannot be. We can think we are. We can have the experience that we are because it is done unto us according to our belief. But in reality, there can be no separation. The divine is omnipresence, all presence. That means the presence that you and I recognize ourselves to be is some part of the presence of the divine. Step number one, we bring ourselves to recognizing what God is as it relates to our desire, our intention, what we want to have happen now. Once we come to a completeness of what God is as it relates to that, then we start to bring ourselves into that picture. Frederick Bales gives an example in his book, Your Mind Can Heal You, of working with a businessman who was very worried, very anxious. And the man was successful, ran a large corporation, was very successful, but he was always worried. He was not at ease, he was not at peace. And Bales Bell's asked him, he says, when in your life, at what time in your life, what activity are you engaged in, or what do you observe? When in your life do you feel something that is perfectly capable, perfectly poised, perfect power? And they lived on the West Coast, and the man said, oh, he says, when I watch the sun go down behind the Pacific Ocean every night, he says, I'm just at such peace. I can feel that there's so much power in that. It's just so perfect, it's beyond words. And Bales told him, he says, you see, the problem is you don't identify with that power. You see that power as being out there. When you recognize that same power, that same poise, that same wisdom that keeps the sun doing that day after day, that is already within you, and it is within you that is recognizing that without there, then you'll start to bring it through your life. We recognize that the divine already is that which we wish to have happen. That change in conditions that we wish to have happen. That change in condition for the good. Right? And remember, the good, it brings a greater expression of life and liberty, truth and beauty into the world. It doesn't harm anyone. It doesn't take anything away from anyone. Right? That's the only morality clause that we use. We are desiring to bring more good through us into this life and into our experience. We recognize that the divine already is it. And at step number 2, we unify with that. That includes us. That includes us. So now we come to step number 3, which is ultimately called declaration or realization, depending upon the teacher. And step number 3 is kind of like an obvious. But because God already is it, because I am part of that, then it must be so. See, it must be so. The divine is perfect order. The divine is perfect health. It has created me out of itself in its image and likeness. My true nature must be perfect health. See, and this is kind of the big aha. It seems perfectly obvious that if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, right? It seems perfectly obvious that if the divine is perfect, and if I am part of the divine, then my nature itself is perfect. But typically that's hard for us to accept. See, at that moment we usually get the but whats, but what come in here. Now this is where 2 additional steps of treatment come in. We talk about the 7-step treatment. If you get to this point and you say, because God already is, and because I am part of that, right? Remember, step number 2 again was you stayed with that until you completed that feeling that you are part of that. And you get to step number 3 and you start to say, well, therefore I accept, I declare, I realize that it must be so, that is my truth as well. If that little voice in the back of the head says, oh no, who you kidding? See, this is where you go into denial and reaffirmation. Those are the extra steps in what's called the 7-step process. Emma Curtis Hopkins tells us that as soon as we declare our good, it becomes obvious to us where that good is not demonstrating. So you say something like, and anything that appears unlike this truth is a lie pretending to be the truth, is a shadow that is eliminated by the darkness. It dissolves into the nothingness from which it came. We negate it. Because there is only God, there is only God's perfection, I am demonstrating right now perfect health, perfect wealth, perfect love, perfect self-expression. Okay? Recognition, what God is. Unification, I am one part of it. Realization or declaration, what I have accepted as true. And remember the tense. It is always present tense. Don't ever say it's going to happen. It has happened in the divine mind. It was so before I was created. It has happened already in the divine mind. And therefore it is so in my life, right here and right now, this instant. And I will not be fooled by appearances. It is so. It must be so, because God is all there is. The next step is gratitude. And gratitude is not being grateful for something that is going to happen. Gratitude is the joy that we experience when it has happened. That feeling of excitement. So the example I use for gratitude is, you get a phone call one day, it's from an old college roommate, and they say, hey Jim, do you remember that $500 you loaned me in freshman year? And I say, oh my goodness. Well, yeah, that was like 50 years ago, but yeah, I remember it. They say, well, it's been on my mind for all these years. I never paid you back, so give me your address and I'm gonna send you a check. And we say, oh, okay, good. So I give them my address. Now, how do I feel about that? Well, I haven't got the check yet. All I have is a promise that the check's in the mail, and you know how that works. So I'm kind of happy that he called, but I'm not going to go spend that money yet. Then one day I go to the mailbox and I open the mail, and there's a check in there. And I say, oh, whoa, I can't believe he actually sent me that check, Now, how happy am I? How grateful am I? How thankful am I? More so than when I received the phone call. But I haven't cashed that check yet. It could bounce, I don't know. This joker's been playing tricks on me for years. So I take it to the bank and I give it to the teller, and the teller cashes it, and they say, well, Jim, it's going to be 3 weeks before it'll clear the other bank, but you'll see that amount show up on your balance once it clears. Now I'm feeling a little bit better, you see. I deposited it, they didn't immediately reject it, but the 3 weeks hasn't passed yet. So I'm happier than I was surely before he called, and after he called, and after I got the check in the mail. But there's one step missing. You see, it hasn't appeared yet. But 3 weeks go by, and I look at my balance online, and sure enough, his check cleared, and I am now $500 richer. Now, how do I feel? How would you feel? That is the level of gratitude that you want to bring yourself to feeling at step number 4. And it is done. It is done. It is done. Not that it's going to happen, it is done. So step number 4, because God is, because I am part of God, because I have come to the realization that this demonstration of joy that I have started with, that what I want to have happen now, must be so, then it is done, and I am grateful to know this. I am grateful that it is done. I am grateful that it has happened. And I now realize it. I now find it. I now discover it. And then the last step, for some, is the most difficult. Actually, I think perhaps the most difficult might be deciding what you want to have happen now. But after that, the last step is release it. Let it go. See, let it go. I know there's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. I have done everything that is required. There is nothing more that I can do at this moment. I surrender. I turn this over to the law of mind. I release it in gratitude. And I let it go. And at that point, we have to stop trying to help it along. So it's like rolling a snowball down the hill. Once you get the snowball started, it rolls. You don't have to run along and push it. Or the vernacular we use when talking about gardening is, when you plant your potatoes, you don't go out every day and dig them up to see if they're growing. You trust that they're growing in that soil. You can tell, you can see little signs, you can see how green the vines are, you can see all these different things, but you don't go out and keep digging up your potatoes. Now for us, in our human approach to life, we want to try to help things along. And this is why this last step, this release, is sometimes difficult for people. Now here's the way I want to explain this. You want to treat and move your feet. You do your treatment and you listen with your intuition. What shall I do now? A great example, Fred Vogt out in Denver, the minister out in Denver, said before he got into religious science, or he was just getting into religious science, he was looking for a job. And he did all of the usual things that you do when you're looking for a job. He printed up resumes. He walked up and down the street. He went into the buildings. He looked for the HR department. He gave in his resume. He did all of these things. He was moving his feet. He was acting as if, but he was working with a practitioner, and excuse me, and she was helping him in treatment for a job. He was almost out of money. He was growing discouraged. He had a nickel left in his pocket. And there was a diner there, and a cup of coffee was a nickel in those days. So he went into the diner and he put his last nickel on the counter and he got a cup of coffee. And as he was sitting there, two men came in behind him, and they sat at a table and they started talking, and they said, "Boy, did you hear so-and-so's leaving the company?" And the other one says, "Yeah, it's going to be hard to fill that position." And they started talking about the qualifications. And they said, "Yeah, well, they're going to need somebody who can do this." And Fred said, "I can do that." "They're going to need somebody who can do this." And Fred said, "I can do that." "They're going to need somebody with this kind of background." Fred said, "I have that kind of background." And he just listened there. And finally he went over and he says, "Gentlemen, I don't mean to be rude. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I overheard what you're saying." He says, "You just described my job. Where do I go?" And they said, "Oh, you go across the street, go up to the 12th floor, go to the personnel office, and ask for so-and-so." And he did, and he went and he got the job. He moved his feet. He was doing the things that came normal and natural, but he also listened to his intuition, listened to his guidance that led him and brought him where he needed to be when he needed to be there. Right? So we go through these steps, and we release it, and we know that it is done. And then the next day we get up and we do it again. And the next day we get up and we do it again until the demonstration unfolds, or we arrive at a point that says, "I can't treat for this anymore because I know it is done. I know it is done." In our first year class, we used to pair students up and have them treat for each other every day for 30 days for some particular desire. And frequently the students would come back and say, "I only made it about 2 weeks, and then it just seemed silly to me to keep treating because I knew it was done." And we go, "Aha, it took you 2 weeks to get there, you see? It took you 2 weeks to get there." Every day we might intuitively see a different aspect of the issue in our treatment. We might speak about it in a slightly different way. We might have a slightly different realization, and maybe we are kind of peeling back the onion. We are removing the obstacles one at a time. No matter what happens, what you do is you make your commitment that you are going to keep doing it until it is done, until you are complete. Okay? So generally the 5 steps are recognition, what God is; unification, I am part of it; realization or declaration is step number 3. Here it is. Here is what I accept. Here's what I know right now. Here's what's happening in my life right now. You might get to a denial and a reaffirmation in there. Step number 4 is gratitude, and step number 5 is release. Those are the 5 steps of spiritual mind treatment. I will send those out in the email. Last week I sent out a link to a website that had those 5 steps on there. You can get the little booklet, Science of Mind, a little magazine that is printed by the Centers for Spiritual Living, and it has a whole month's worth of spiritual mind treatments in there, every month with a different theme. You can read it every morning. You can get the feel for the steps. You can learn how to do this for yourself. Excuse me, but as Wendy gave us in the opening, we must observe, we must practice. We must observe, we must practice. What do you want to have happen in your life right now? Do you believe that there's a power in the universe that will respond to you? As you start to change your beliefs, that power works with you to continue changing your beliefs. It is not an act of willpower and scrunching up your eyes and forcing yourself to a new way. You start the ball rolling. Once you release that treatment has the intelligence. I think Dr. Holmes called it a spiritual entity. Right? Just like putting a seed of a tomato in the soil. There's an intelligence there that knows how to produce a plant and bring about a tomato fruit. You have placed your seed. The law is doing the work. You have released it. The law is producing whatever change or changes as needs must be in your consciousness so that the avenue through which the new conditions can flow. And you have to keep your mind changed. Right? So this is important. We can take one step forward and then we can take 2 steps back. So we want to keep doing our treatment work until we stop taking those steps backwards, So by that I mean we might say, well, I'm treating for perfect employment, and I know that everything in the universe is in its perfect place at its perfect time. I know that there's never too much or too little of anything in the universe, that the perfect place for me to use my gifts and talents must already exist. And I'm already in that place. In divine mind, I am already in that place, you see. That's an example of how we might do that treatment. But then we get on the phone and we start talking to somebody and they say, God, isn't the job market terrible? And we fall right into that and we say, oh yeah, it's terrible. I don't know that I'm ever going to find work. Well, you have just erased. You have just taken 2 steps back. Catch yourself. Observe yourself. Keep moving forward. When I was learning how to fly, my instructor always told me there's nothing more useless to a pilot than the runway behind the plane. Keep moving forward. Your eyes and your feet point the same way for a reason. Keep moving forward. Spiral upward every day in your spiritual growth, in your awareness of what God is, in binding yourself to that awareness, in allowing that to come through your life. You are a beautiful, individualized expression of God. Enjoy, and so it is. All right, so let's put this together then, and let's do a closing treatment together. Step number 1. There is only one life, and that life is God, and that life is perfect. That life is omniscient. It always knows what to do. It is omnipotent. It is always capable of doing what needs to be done. It is omnipresence. It is all presence in the universe. It has created me out of itself. Step number 2. I am its living enterprise. I am its arms and its legs and its hands and its feet. And God loves others by means of me, and God loves me by means of each other. Step number 3. I realize then that divine wisdom is with me always. I realize then that divine power flows through me always. I realize then that everyone I meet and everything I meet is some part of the divine presence. And at that spiritual level, we will all work in harmony for the higher good. So I accept into my life right here and right now my spiritual practice, my conscious cooperation, my dedication to continually explore the spiritual nature of this universe through observation and experimentation. Divine guidance leads me, makes the crooked ways straight, and each day blesses me by allowing me to experience more and more of what its magnificence is. Step number 4. I am so grateful for this opportunity to be here today. I am so grateful to know that there's a power in the universe that responds to me according to my belief. I am so grateful for this increased experience and the activity and the presence of God that has already unfolded through me this day and continues a little more each and every day. Step number 5. I release this treatment to that perfect law that knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, and does not need my help. As a snowball rolling down the hill, this treatment goes where it needs to go, does what it needs to do, and has already produced the changes in my consciousness through which a greater experience of the presence and the activity of God is now flowing. And so it is. By the way, and so it is the literal Aramaic translation of Amen. Amen. And so it is. I have declared it. It is so, and so it is. Everybody have a beautiful week. A couple of announcements. Tomorrow night, 7:50.